KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is dedicated to empowering our communities by providing progressive talk radio for our audience. We strive to be an intersectional voice for the voiceless. As a Black-owned and operated station, we are committed to highlighting diverse perspectives and creating safe spaces for meaningful dialogue. We believe that everyone has something unique to bring to these political, economic, social, and cultural conversations, and we don't shy away from the hard conversations about current events. We endeavor to be a beacon of hope and understanding, while boldly challenging listeners to think more deeply about difficult topics that impact us all. With this in mind, our mission statement at KBLA Talk 1580 is simple: to create an inclusive platform that promotes civil discourse through honest dialogue and encourages personal growth among our listeners, so they can become the active agents of change. Our vision is to establish ourselves as the premier radio network with relevant programming across the beloved community, connecting people through shared experiences and collective power for lasting impact beyond these challenging times.
Live from historic Leimert Park in Los Angeles, California, I'm Tavis, Smiley, and I'm so glad to see you and me back in stride again. Before we get started with today's program, let me invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley and get updates on X, formerly Twitter, at Tavis Smiley. By the way, should you miss any part of today's program or want to catch up on previous shows, you can always visit thetavissmileyshow.com or wherever you get your podcast and listen to the Tavis Smiley podcast at your leisure. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, in a world of nearly 8 billion people, there are 2,755 billionaires, according to Forbes magazine. 2,755 worldwide. 14 of those persons are black. 8 are African American. 2 of those are women. Yesterday on this program, we had a spirited conversation about what it means to get the bag these days. Getting the bag, and who and what get exploited in the process of getting the bag, when your end and aim is to get the bag by any means necessary. Spirited conversation yesterday. Today, then, a conversation in hour 2 with author Shamari Wills about black fortunes, namely the story of the first 6 African Americans who escaped slavery and became millionaires. It should be a fascinating dialogue in our second hour today. In our third hour, 2 conversations. Up first, as the Hollywood strike continues, a dialogue with award-winning producer Stephen Adams, who's been bridging the African continent and the Americas through film. Look forward to that dialogue on the B side of our 3.
Don't give it all to him, babe. Feelings involved, don't wanna stall you, babe. But in my head, I hope it falls through, yeah. I took the loss, didn't know what it cost, but now I'm ready for
a conversation with emerging Billboard charting R&B sensation Kevin Ross, who's joining us live in studio today on the backside of our 3. That's his new track, Ready For It. We'll talk to Kevin Ross later today in the final half hour of this program. But in this first hour today, a conversation about a fascinating new study which reveals that Donald Trump's rise to power resulted from America's racial divide, not cult leadership. When I saw the study, I was intrigued by it immediately and found myself discussing it over dinner one night with a friend of mine. We both agreed that that was actually never the claim. The polling and other data have always shown that racial anxiety and antipathy fueled Trump's rise to power, and his demagogic leadership abilities transformed the GOP's normal political relationship with the Republican base into a cult of personality with exclusive loyalty to him. And we see that playing out even today as he runs for the White House once again. So that's how my friend and I see the story of Trump's rise and perhaps, as I just intimated, his resurrection. That said, I'm pleased to welcome the authority and anthropologist behind this new study, Dr. Susannah Crockford. Dr. Crockford, good to have you on. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm well. How are you?
I am well, thank you. Good to have you on our program. Glad we have the hour to sort of unpack this subject matter. Let me start with this, a broad question. What is it that you are bringing to us in this new study that you think we have heretofore not either not recognized or not accepted as part of the narrative for how Donald Trump rose to the presidency in the first place?
So my argument in the study is really about claims that are quite common, especially amongst Democratic Party leaders, that Donald Trump is a cult leader and that the Republicans are a cult. So what I'm arguing is that, in fact, to call him a cult leader and to call the Republicans a cult is sort of to let the Republican Party and beyond that, white evangelical Christians who kind of support him in large numbers, it sort of lets them off the hook, and it ignores this long history of racism behind the kind of support that Donald Trump gets, especially from white evangelical Christians.
Mm-hmm. Give me your sense of who, in fact, calls him a cult leader and why they put him in that frame.
So it's actually very common. For example, Nancy Pelosi called the Republicans a cult. She said that, Donald Trump has hijacked the Republican Party and turned it into a cult. Adam Schiff called the Republican Party essentially a cult. Mm-hmm. And very interestingly, House of Representative member, I think she's retired now, but Jackie Spear called the Republicans a cult. Now, her voice carries authority because she was at the Jonestown massacre in 1978 with her former boss, Congressman Leo Ryan. Now, he was murdered on the airstrip at Jonestown, which was run by Jim Jones, which is one of the cases that many people associate with the term cult. So when she calls the Republican Party a cult, it kind of has this authority that she knows what she's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that calling him a cult leader is in any way intentional? And if so, to what end and aim?
I think it is intentional. I think what they're trying to do is make a difference between the current Republican Party under Donald Trump and what they might see as traditional Republicans or kind of traditional conservatives. So what it does is separate them rhetorically and linguistically by saying that it's now a cult under Donald Trump. That means that the Republican Party as a whole can still be worked with, that they are not, in fact, the same as Donald Trump, that something has happened to these Republicans, right, that they've been, so the association with being a cult is of being brainwashed, right, of being part of a small religious group that has been brainwashed into following an authoritarian leader. Mm-hmm. And what this does is it separates the longer history and they might argue the wider body of Republicans from the more recent Trumpist Republicans.
Well, I take your point. Just getting started in this conversation with Dr. Susannah Crockford, an anthropologist and author of this new study which reveals that Donald Trump's rise in power, in fact, resulted from America's racial divide and not from cult leadership. We certainly know the racist ways in which Donald Trump has moved and certainly governed over that 4-year period. But this study puts its finger on something a little bit different. You heard her say a moment ago that what she's trying to do is to not let others off by saying it's simply a cult and ignore the racist white supremacist past in the country that produced one Donald Trump. Let's talk about it in this hour with Dr. Susannah Crockford. I got to start saying that slowly, Crockford, when we come forward on Tavis, Smiley.
Seeking the truth, speaking the truth. This is the Tavis Smiley Show.
MC Light for AARP. Hip-hop, the cultural phenomenon that took New York by storm in 1973, is celebrating 50 years of rocking mics and crowds. Whether you're a ride-or-die hip-hop head or simply curious about its origins, check out the latest issue of AARP the magazine. It celebrates this incredible milestone with a featured story brimming with fun hip-hop facts and history. Head over to aarp.org/black community to learn more.
Community is more than where you live. It's the people in it who go above and beyond to help it thrive. During the 50th anniversary of hip-hop and the 75th anniversary of Black Radio, AARP recognizes the members, volunteers, people, and partners giving back to our communities. We believe when our efforts drive change for the greater good, we all thrive together. To learn more about how AARP supports efforts to keep our communities thriving, visit aarp.org/black community.
You're listening to K-Trip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like Watering Your Lawn During the Hottest Time of the Day and Leaky Faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on. K-Trip.
Hey, I am Jasmine Carson, LSU Women's Basketball National Champion. I had to up my game, and this time I upped my intimate grooming routine too. Venus for Pubic Hair and Skin is the only razor and regimen specifically designed for your pubic area. Featuring a razor with a patented irritation defense bar and a skincare regimen that is dermatologist tested, Venus helps protect your pubic skin from shave irritation. Visit GilletteVenus.com to learn more about the full regimen of products.
Have you heard about Lendistry? Lendistry is a national black-led small business lender that is headquartered right here in LA. Once you've started your business, Lendistry provides flexible financing options starting at $50,000 to help you access the affordable capital needed to grow. Visit Lendistry.com/KBLA to learn more.
Dominique DePrima for KBLA Talk 1580. Are you worried about your credit score? Well, look, you can rebuild it. There are lots of factors that go into determining your credit score, but one of the most effective ways to improve your score is to consistently pay your bills on time, over time. If you're forgetful about payments, like me, try automating your bill payments. That way all your creditors get paid on time, and you'll have freed yourself of trying to remember. Whatever your financial goals, U.S. Bank Access Commitment Initiatives can help support you in reaching them. Access your financial goals at usbank.com/access. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
More honesty than you can handle. More empowerment than you can imagine. You're tuned in to Tavis Smiley.
And I'm delighted about it. Our guest in this first hour is Dr. Susannah Crockford, anthropologist and author of a new study revealing that Donald Trump's rise in power resulted from America's racial divide and not from cult leadership. Dr. Crockford, you were talking a moment ago about the ways in which the Republican base, the Republican Party, in many ways is not that indistinguishable from Donald Trump, particularly when it comes to advancing these racial tropes. And to call him a cult leader suggests that he's doing something that's unique or different. When in fact, it seems to me that the whole lot is spoiled. But say a bit more about that point you were making a moment ago.
So the point I was making was really about how to call Donald Trump a cult leader is really to kind of separate out or make aberrant what he is doing, when actually it's better seen as part of the religious and political landscape, especially amongst white evangelical Christians.
Mm-hmm. When you say that's part of the religious landscape, to your mind, how has that infected the political workings of the GOP? That would allow it to produce a candidate and a victorious candidate like Donald Trump?
So in the article, I describe the long history of the involvement of various evangelical groups with the Republican Party, and then that's really part of the argument that this isn't new, that there's a much longer history going on here, and you can trace this back to the 19th century when mainline Protestant groups split over the abolition of slavery, and the Southern Baptist Convention, but also all the other mainline Protestant groups split, and a lot of the Southern groups specifically supported segregation, and that history went into the 20th century, and then kind of fueled the actions of people like Jerry Falwell in the Moral Majority to get involved in politics, to support a version of America that they recognize, what they think of as their values in this traditional sense of America, which is really quite explicitly a white supremacist version of America. And that's what's hidden or occluded when you see Donald Trump as something new or very different, that this racial animus has been going on for a long time.
I take your point, and indeed you're right about that, which raises the obvious question, at least in my mind, which is why, given the long trajectory, the long history of this racist thinking inside of the GOP, fueled by, as you put it, this religious landscape that's littered with all kinds of racist leanings and ideologies, why it took as long as it did, in fact, to create a person like Donald Trump. We won't call him a cult leader. That's the point of your survey, the point of your study, rather. But why do you think, given that backstory that you just laid out quite brilliantly, that it took as long as it did to get someone like a Donald Trump to come to the fore?
Well, I think you can see forerunners of Donald Trump in people like Barry Goldwater in the 1960s, who was also quite extreme and also quite explicitly racist at times. So these leaders have emerged, and I think what's really different about Donald Trump is partly it's to do with the fact that he no longer upholds the values that were once sort of necessary to be a leader of the Republican Party. A lot is spoken of about Donald Trump's, for example, his personal life, the fact that he's not very good at quoting the Bible. So he doesn't look or sound like your kind of traditional Republican candidate who is, has to uphold these moral values. Donald Trump doesn't do that. So that's why he was seen as this aberration. And there was a lot of speculation from, 2015 onwards that, evangelical Christians wouldn't support Donald Trump because he wasn't one of them. But actually, I think what his support, which has remained incredibly high and incredibly steady amongst evangelical Christians, shows us that they are more concerned with having someone who supports their racial and political values than what they claim to be their moral values about things like the family.
And yet, to your point, he does not possess, Trump does not possess those moral values that we typically associate with those who want to be standard bearers for the GOP. I take your point that they care more about him advancing their sort of racist ideology than they care about their moral ideology. But that's so different. We've never experienced that before. Why do you think that the GOP writ large was willing to make that trade-off, willing to make that sacrifice?
Well, I think it speaks quite clearly to the fact that the moral values were never as important as political power. I think they're willing to make that trade-off because what they get is power. They stay in power, and Donald Trump has proved remarkably popular, at least amongst his base. One of the things he does that is quite different to how presidents are expected to behave is he doesn't try and broaden his coalition. He's not trying to bring more people into the fold. He only talks to his base. And that's, at least one of the things I argue, is that that's more similar to a religious leader, that someone who's speaking to the believers, to the already kind of convinced. He's not trying to turn anyone. He's not trying to convince independents. So this is often seen as a political weakness of Donald Trump, yet so far that hasn't weakened him amongst Republicans because they see him as supporting their values and their vision of America, and for them that's a route to power.
What does that mean for the Republican Party writ large, long term? What does it mean for that party long term if Donald Trump continues to speak only to the base. Now, the base is significant enough to get him the nomination this next time around. As you well know, I haven't talked to a single guest on this program, in fact, who doesn't believe that he is already the presumptive Republican nominee for the 2024 presidential race. But speaking just to the base, in some ways, again, will get you the nomination, but I'm not so sure it means that Donald Trump can defeat Joe Biden, and yet I'm reading data every day that there are folk who don't think I'm right about this. You know, one of the arguments that people have made for why Barack Obama showed up at the White House a week or so ago was because he sees the tea leaves, that Obama realizes that Donald Trump can win again and that Joe Biden needs some help. And so Obama, shows up at the White House, a week or so ago because he understands that. He sees what others are in denial about, that Donald Trump could, in fact, defeat Joe Biden in another head-to-head. But it seems to me that you can't do that if you're only talking to the base of the Republican Party. So I'm not sure strategically how far that gets him. That's my read. What's your take?
Well, I think he's definitely the nominee. There's no disagreement from me there, and I think that's pretty much, as you said, the presumptive view. I think that he has the votes from his base, and he can bring them out in very reliably. And there's some old political wisdom here, which is that incumbents lose more often than opponents win. So if Joe Biden doesn't mobilize enough support on his side, because Donald Trump's support is so rock solid, and he will mobilize that, it's between 30 and 40%, he will mobilize that, it could happen. If enough people stay home, if enough people vote for third-party candidates, and enough people just think, well, I'm just a bit sick of Joe Biden, Trump could win. Yep.
We discussed on this program some days ago a survey, a study that found that there's concern about Biden turning out his base in this next race. Of course, we're months away from that. Things could change, and once Donald Trump, to the extent he does become the nominee, I think that changes everything for the president. He has a real target, and I'm not sure that data will hold. I certainly hope it doesn't, but we shall see in the coming months. Back to this point you made earlier about the fact that to call Donald Trump a cult leader and to call the GOP a cult suggests, like in the Jim Jones example you offered, that these folks have been brainwashed. So if they have not been brainwashed, what have they been? And maybe the answer is they are being what they've always been, which is racist to the core. I don't know. But if they've not been brainwashed in a cultist fashion, what have they been? Because one cannot but argue that they are Donald Trump sycophants. So if they're not brainwashed, how do you describe their behavior and their loyalty to him?
Yes, I think one of the reasons why the cult description is so persuasive is because so many people look at Donald Trump supporters and they're fervent and they're fanatical and they support him no matter what. I mean, he's under, his third indictment now, and they still support him. An indictment on the level that he's had would, in conventional wisdom, be absolute poison for any other political candidate. So why do they still support him? It's not because they're brainwashed, it's because they're making a choice. Right? This is the way they see America, and this is the way they want America to be. This vision of a white, Christian, English-speaking America where everyone else is at least pushed to the sidelines or, in some versions actually expunged. They support a system of white supremacy because they benefit from this. I've been doing fieldwork in Arizona, in very rural Arizona, for a long time now, over 10 years, and there were people who were expressing these sorts of racist sentiments far before Donald Trump. They were always there. And when he came to power, I thought, all those old guys who said all those awful things, that's who's supporting Donald Trump. And, these people were always there. And now what they have is a voice, and they have a route to power. They're no longer being told that they're declining or they're dying out. This is their guy, so they're not going to stop supporting him. For a lot of them, they see this as their last chance to, as they call it, quote-unquote, save America. For them, it's an existential battle. Some of them even see it as a battle of good versus evil. So, of course, they're not going to stop supporting him. They believe that they're right. They think what they're doing is righteous and just.
Yeah, but they're not.
And that's what makes it so dangerous.
Yeah, but they're not brainwashed. I take your point. You said they've always been there. Okay, indeed they have always been there. And yet, the conventional narrative in this country has been that way of thinking in America, in a nation that is more multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic than ever before, in a nation that is hurtling toward a day in the not-too-distant future where this country, for the first time ever, will be a country of a majority-minority country. We're just years away from that. The thinking, the conventional thinking has been that the way of thinking that you just described, that mindset is dying out. And yet, if you look at the numbers, it suggests that it may be dying out, but it ain't dying out fast enough, Dr. Crockford.
No, I don't think it is dying out as quickly as predicted, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that I think that there's a persistence of white supremacy, or at least an implicit white supremacy amongst people who would not explicitly think themselves as racist. So, for example, people who have voted even for Barack Obama then went and voted for Trump, and they won't necessarily think of themselves as racist, but they still, at a kind of core level, support these what I call implicit white supremacist aims. Another factor that I don't think you should discount is the extent to which the voting in America has been gerrymandered and distorted, so that even in states where you have black majorities, where you have Latino majorities, often they can't vote in a way that will carry their state because of the way the districts have been drawn. And obviously there's been a lot of cases in the Supreme Court even about this recently to try and change those maps. Some have, some haven't. But those lines persist, and I think that's part of the story as well.
To what extent do you think gerrymandering has aided and abetted Trump's efforts, particularly when you look at the House of Representatives right now and see once again the sycophants in the House who support Donald Trump no matter what? They are only there in part because of gerrymandering. That's how I read it. Again, what's your take on it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a number of states where you can see this quite clearly in the data, where, for example, in Wisconsin, where you will always get these kind of very solid red majorities in the State House and in the House of Representatives because of the way the lines have been drawn around the district. The same thing happened in a number of other states. In Arizona, they had to have a redistricting commission to try and sort out these gerrymandered districts, but somehow it still produced this result where you have one or two Democrat districts, but the overwhelming majority are conservative. Now this is happening on purpose, and it's not an accident. So absolutely, this is part of how Trump's been able to stay in power, or even gain power in the first place. Remember, he didn't win the popular vote. That's
right. We're talking with Dr. Susannah Crockford about her new study, which finds that Donald Trump's rise in power, and perhaps his rise once again, results from America's racial divide, not from this notion of a cult that he is the leader of, but ingrained in this country. When we come forward, Dr. Crockford, I want to ask her how she reads the following, that Trump voters perceive more racism against whites than black folk. That's how they see it. Don't laugh. That's how they see it. We'll talk about it when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Hope, agency, dignity. This is Tavis Smiley.
I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I learned about atrial fibrillation the hard way. My symptoms would come and go, shortness of breath, fatigue. I kept going. Then I got so lightheaded, I couldn't. My doctor said I have AFib, so I'm about 5 times more likely to have a stroke. Other symptoms, irregular heartbeat, heart racing, chest pain can come and go, but the risk of stroke stays. If you have symptoms, tell a doctor. Visit NoTimeToWait.com.
Sponsored by Bristol-Myers Squibb and Pfizer.
Parents, we know we can't protect our kids from everything. Eventually, they're going to bump their heads or scrape their knees. But we can protect them from 6 types of cancer. HPV, or human papillomavirus, is a common, preventable virus that can cause cancer later in life. The HPV vaccine prevents human papillomavirus and all the cancers it can cause. The American Cancer Society recommends getting your sons and daughters the HPV vaccine starting at age 9 to protect them later in life.
Thank you for joining us here on the Black Information Network. I'm Mike Moore. Now, here's the latest. Lawyers for President Trump are pushing back on a protective order request in his election interference case. The Department of Justice filed for the order asking the judge to place some limits on Trump's speech about the case after the former president posted, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." In their response Monday, Trump's lawyers claim it violates the First Amendment. A former Minneapolis police officer who held back a crowd during African-American George Floyd's arrest in 2020 is being sentenced to prison. Tutow was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months for aiding and abetting second-degree manslaughter in the death of Floyd. Dow is already serving a 3.5-year sentence for conviction on federal charges of violating Floyd's civil rights during the incident. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Slow and going Glendale. It's troubles in Paramount. Mid-City trying to clear a crash in Boyle Heights. It's a wreck affecting our carpool lane on the 10 east at Soto Street. The carpool lane blocked. As you get to the 101 is where things slow down. Mid-City on that Santa Monica Freeway 10, eastbound side of the 10 at Vermont. 2 left lanes are taken up with the crash here involving a motorcyclist. We're loaded up from Washington Boulevard. Paramount, it's a wreck on the 105 east at Paramount Boulevard. Onto the right side, the on-ramp partially blocked here. Coming away from the 710 to Busy Drive. And Glendale, it's a wreck in center traffic lanes on the 134 west at San Fernando Road. Center lanes blocked as you get towards the 2 is where the slow drive begins.
Fall into autumn hiring with Indeed. Their all-in-one solution makes it easy to attract, interview, and hire candidates. Sponsor a job and immediately get a short list of quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job description. Visit Indeed.com/credit.
Staples has great prices on everything you need for back to school. Right now, a 24-pack of Crayola crayons and Marble comp books are just 50 cents each. Pricing may vary in-store and online. NC26, comp books in-store only. School on, save on at Staples.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Dodgers put up 13 runs in San Diego on Monday. Mookie Betts hit a grand slam. He now has 31 homers this season. The Dodgers take 3 or 4 from the Padres to move to 19 games over 500. Former Lakers star Derek Fisher is the new boys basketball coach at Crespi High School in Encino. He coached the New York Knicks for 2 years and the LA Sparks for 3. Dorsey High School's football team will play King Drew at the Coliseum in a city section matchup on October 27th. Rams coach Sean McVay said wide receiver Cooper Kupp will miss the first 2 preseason games. Kupp is recovering from a hamstring injury. The Chargers are expecting their defense to be one of the best in the NFL this season with the addition of former UCLA linebacker Eric Kendrick. Kendrick was an 8-year standout with Minnesota. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
On a Mission Youth Travel presents the 2023 Morehouse Homecoming HBCU College Tour, October 25th through October 29th in Atlanta, Georgia. Open to high school students grades 9 through 12. For more information, please call 323-298-4779. Again, 323-298-4779. Students will tour Morehouse College, Spelman College, Clark Atlanta University, Alabama State, and Tuskegee University. Email info@onamissionyouthtravel.com. The HBCU tour price includes all meals, transportation, round-trip airfare with one checked bag, hotel accommodation, all museums, college tours, and admission to the Morehouse versus Kentucky State University homecoming football game. Spaces are filling up quickly, so call today to sign up. 323-298-4779. Again, 323-298-4779.
Extreme heat increases your risk of heat illness and death. Warning signs of heat exhaustion include muscle cramps, headache, and nausea. Signs of heat stroke include a fever of 103 or higher, confusion, and loss of consciousness. Protect yourself by limiting time spent outdoors, staying hydrated, and staying cool in air-conditioned spaces. Learn how to stay safer from extreme heat at heatreadyca.com. Brought to you by the state of California.
helping to make you the most knowledgeable person in your circle of friends. This is Tavis Smiley.
Our guest at this hour is Dr. Susannah Crockford, and we're glad to have you tuned in. We're talking to her about her new study, which reveals that Donald Trump's rise in power, and as I keep saying, his perhaps resurrection, has resulted from America's racial divide, not from cult leadership. People like to dismiss Donald Trump as a cult leader and the GOP as a cult, and there are a lot of folk who have been guilty of saying that. It's not really true. His rise is absolutely connected to America's racial divide, and her study sorts of underscores that and reveals that in a variety of interesting ways. And so we're talking to Dr. Crockford, who is an anthropologist, about the study. In case you just tuned in, I wanted to give you bring you up to speed and where we are in this hour. That said, as I mentioned a moment ago, Dr. Crockford, I wanted to get your take on this data that suggests that Trump voters perceive more racism against white folk than they do black folk. As I said to the audience, don't laugh. That really is how they see the America in which we live, that they are the victims, the subjects of more racism than are African Americans. One, your thoughts on that data, and secondly, how that impacts the research and work that you've done that we're discussing in this hour.
Right, so the data comes probably from surveys that ask people about their perceptions of racism. And, people's perceptions are based on their opinions and their biases, and a lot of people don't examine where their biases may come from. So for a lot of white people in America, I think that for so long, their race wasn't named. It was the norm. And then suddenly people start saying, as I just did, they start talking about white people, and they start talking about white privilege. And suddenly they feel named and identified in that way. And that feels very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And it's that sense of discomfort then gets kind of twisted around and projected outwards. And I do think it's a form of projection, right? That instead of acknowledging the racism that still exists in America, what they do is they say, actually, we're the ones that are being discriminated against, because that loss of being the norm feels like that they're being attacked. And so then that is then projected outwards as a perception of being affected by racism. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of ways you can track that happening. Things like, the opposition to affirmative action, for example, is seen as advantages being given to other people, but not to white people. Even though it kind of ignores the basis, which is that, white people already had massive advantages in getting into colleges.
Mm. You mentioned the phrase white privilege. I wanted to get to that, so I'm glad you went there. What's white privilege got to do with all of this?
So white privilege is this idea that or at least the more that you adhere to various standards of whiteness in America, the more advantages you gain from that. And there's a number of different kind of ways that you can track whiteness. It's to do with obviously color of skin, but there's a number of other ways that can be tracked as well. I think, for example, body type, it's to do with a way of speaking. Mm-hmm. And all of these kind of come as a cultural package. And the more white you can appear and you can perform as, then the more advantages that you can get in, and these advantages have been traced through a number of different sectors, in education, in housing, in finance, in whether you're going to get a loan, right? So there's all these different ways that just being white or being perceived as white, presenting yourself in a certain way, can provide you with material economic advantages. And that's what we talk about when we're talking about white privilege. It's really about an increase in material advantages in the amount that you adhere to these categories, these categorizations of whiteness.
Mm-hmm. Is there a link, though, between that white privilege and the results in your survey?
Yeah, so what I was looking at is, I didn't do a survey. What I do is ethnographic fieldwork, which is slightly different. Mm-hmm. But yes, so I was studying Republicans in Arizona, and, most of them are white. And the way that they see themselves is very much as the norm and not as being white. And so when they see people identifying them as white and taking away the things that they had just assumed that were theirs automatically, then they see that as an attack on them specifically. And I mentioned earlier that, some will see this as literally being attacked, as losing America. And these are all kind of ways of speaking about this feeling of having lost something. And what they're losing is their white privilege, even if they may not actually be losing it. It's that sense of losing it, right? It's through perception.
Mm-hmm. As you said already a few times in this conversation, the reason for your study is to underscore the point that Trump's rise to power is not due to his being a cult leader or overseeing some cult that is known as the GOP. So I want to ask a strange question here, which is whether you call it a cult or not, any of their fears, I'm putting fears in air quotes here, are any of their fears in this moment legitimate?
That's an interesting question. So what their fear is that the America that they know, that they think that they know, is changing and they are losing it. And you mentioned things like the demographic change. Mm-hmm. So you could say to a certain extent, yes, that is happening. For example, the birth rates, I know the data best in Arizona, for example, the birth rates amongst whites are declining, whereas the birth rates amongst Latino populations are increasing. A lot of that is down to migration, but it's also down to family size. Mm-hmm. So that is something that demographically you can track, and it is happening. Now, whether that means all the things that they fear are happening are going to happen, well, I would say that that's unlikely. But, there are changes in America, and that is what they are afraid of. Yeah. They're afraid of change and of losing their power, and perhaps they are to a certain extent.
Yeah, I only asked that question because I've never known a cult or studied any cult, or read about a cult where those who were a part of it weren't afraid of something. Now, somebody made them feel a particular way, but the reason why they're a part of this body is they're scared of something. They're running from something and they're running to something. So maybe I should reframe the question and put it that way. Are these people, these followers, are they running from something? And if so, what are they running to?
I think what they're running from is a sense of that America is changing, and that's what they're terrified of. Right. Because change for them means a loss of their position, a loss of their privilege. So if things are changing, it's not changing in the way they want. They want the status quo to remain as it is.
Mm-hmm. When we come forward, a few more things I wanted to get the response to from Dr. Susannah Crockford. Her study, again, reveals that Donald Trump's rise in power resulted directly from America's racial divide and not from this notion of his being a cult leader. Great deal more to talk about when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
What's your quarrel with the world? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What does access mean?
Access means owning a home. Access means growing my business.
Access means building generational wealth.
No matter your goals, U.S. Bank Access Commitment Programs and initiatives provide the tools and resources to help you reach them. Access your financial goals at usbank.com/access. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Hey, life doesn't stop when cancer starts. After diagnosis, treatment is vital. But for some, just getting there, to appointments, chemo, or radiation, is a major challenge. You can change that. Volunteer to give rides with the American Cancer Society Road to Recovery program. Driving for a few hours of your day can make a life-saving difference for someone with cancer. Visit cancer.org/drive to learn more.
I'm David Goldberg, a bilingual elementary school teacher and president of the California Teachers Association. As we start a new school year, there's something new happening in California's public schools. They're called community schools, where families, students, educators, and communities are making decisions as one.
As a parent, I feel like we're really valued as partners in the education system.
Community schools are bridging the systems of academics with the community.
The curriculum is designed around the students and their academic needs.
I know community schools are working. We see it in parent involvement. We see it in student academics.
We saw double-digit gains in math, English, and reading scores.
It's a more innovative, holistic approach to educating students.
I really feel like this is the first time that we're really seeing a system change in our school.
It's innovative, fresh,
and they're already working. We invite you to learn more about community schools as we cook education here in California. And that's why CTA brought you this.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Maisha Cairo here for KBLA Talk 1580. We're live in Los Angeles at JP Morgan Chase's Advancing Black Wealth Tour. And I'm speaking to some of the attendees today to see why it was so important for them to be here.
Yeah, this is Lathan and Tyler. Main reason that's very important for me to be here is just to leave a legacy for my kids. Black wealth, generational wealth is what we need in our community, you know. Chase, someone has to take the lead. They're showing, big business like Chase cares, and they're putting their money where their mouth is at. So it's good to see, big institution like Chase, giving a lifting hand, to the community, and you got to respect that. It makes me want to bank with Chase, and give them, another look if I go to another institution. I actually see what Chase is doing for the community.
That's right, Chase is doing their part to help advance Black wealth. For more money support, tune in every day from 12 to 2 to KBLA Talk 1580's Midday Money Chain, right here.
Made fresh daily in the Mert Park, Los Angeles, California. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Dr. Crockford, I know that you do all kinds of work, and one of the things that I'm told that you're working on is examining the ethics and politics of conspiracy theories. I want to link these two parts of your work, if I can. We're talking in this hour about your study, again, revealing that Donald Trump's rise to power is connected to the racist ways in this country and not some sort of fanatical cult that he is the leader of. I want to connect that, if I can, to the politics of conspiracy theories, because one of the things that seems to drive and animate these persons who are supporting one Donald Trump is their belief in a variety of conspiracy theories. You see it all the time on Fox News, whether it's great replacement. I could run the list, don't have time to do all that. But is there a link between those two things?
Yeah, so the conspiracy theories are obviously very popular amongst Trump voters. As you just mentioned, there's a number we could talk about. There's great replacement theory. One of the ones that's very popular is something called QAnon. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the reason why people will associate these two words, cult and conspiracy theory, is that, a conspiracy theory is an idea or a theory about kind of the powers that be and what they're doing that doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of other people, that they see it as irrational. And then cults are seen as religious groups that have beliefs that don't make a lot of sense, that they're irrational. So these two ideas really work together, right? So instead of being a religious group that has beliefs, when you come across a group that seems very different to what you're used to and what you would expect to perceive, you can call them a cult which believes in conspiracy theories. And conspiracy theories are very popular amongst Trump voters because a lot of what they expect to see about reality has been changing. And often when your expectations of reality are transgressed, that makes you distrustful, and distrust leads down this path towards believing in these vast conspiracies.
What does all this say, broad question here, what does all this say or portend about the future of the Republican Party?
Well, nothing good. If you have a party that's led by, right, by a leader that has several indictments that, people just believe unquestioningly, even though he has these indictments and he spreads these very racist things, then this is sending the Republican Party down a path where they are going to continue to only appeal to this very narrow demographic, where they're not going to support a broad coalition, and they're going to keep trying to kind of push through these policies which alienate and exclude people. And this happens across a number of different, I can give one example, for example, the fight against Roe v. Wade, right? They're just going to keep pushing what you might call these cultural issues because those appeal to this very narrow group that they know is going to support them. So what they're doing is basically undermining their future viability. And the only way that works as a successful electoral strategy is if they also continue to remove the ability for those people that oppose them to be able to vote.
when we come forward, there are two other things I want to get your read on. One is the culture wars that you just referenced. My view is, and I've said more than once on this program, that we haven't seen anything like the culture wars that we're going to see in the next few months and the next couple of years as we move through and into this next presidential season and administration. The culture wars are about to get much worse than I think we would imagine. I want to get your take on that. And then this notion of, again, Trump not aligning at all with the moral values that many of his supporters espouse. It's one thing to be, singing off-key on one or two notes, but perennially, every day we learn more and more about Donald Trump's misbehavior, which is not just slightly off from their so-called moral values, but he's off the chart. And yet that does not in any way cause them to pull their support back from Donald Trump. That disconnect is fascinating for me. Our remaining moments with Dr. Susannah Crockford when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
MC Light, or AARP, hip-hop, the cultural phenomenon that took New York by storm in 1973, is celebrating 50 years of rocking mics and crowds. Whether you're a ride-or-die hip-hop head or simply curious about its origins, check out the latest issue of AARP, the magazine. It celebrates this incredible milestone with a featured story brimming with fun hip-hop facts and history. Head over to aarp.org/black community to learn more.
Community is more than where you live. It's the people in it who go above and beyond to help it thrive. During the 50th anniversary of hip-hop and the 75th anniversary of Black Radio, AARP recognizes the members, volunteers, people, and partners giving back to our communities. We believe when our efforts drive change for the greater good, we all thrive together. To learn more about how AARP supports efforts to keep our communities thriving, visit aarp.org/black community.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 joins you in standing for voting rights. When We All Vote is a leading national nonpartisan initiative on a mission to change the culture around voting and to increase participation in each and every election by helping to close the race and age gap. Created by Michelle Obama, When We All Vote brings together individuals, institutions, brands, and organizations to register new voters across the country and advance civic education for the entire family and voters of every age to build and inform and engage electorate for today and generations to come. When We All Vote empowers their supporters and volunteers to take action through voting, advocating for their rights, and holding their elected officials accountable. Please visit whenweallvote.org to stand up for your rights, voting rights. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Is this tree good for climbing? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is killing people. It's a powerful opioid, often made illegally and commonly mixed with illicit drugs. It can even be pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medications. Just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, can potentially be lethal. This isn't an ad to scare you, but it is an ad to make you think twice. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
Let's get back to more of this rich dialogue with Tavis Smiley.
We've got a few minutes left in dialogue with Dr. Susannah Crockford, our guest in this hour, anthropologist who has brought us some new data about the backstory of Donald Trump's rise to power and his potential re-rise, if I can put it that way. Dr. Crockford, your thoughts on these culture wars? You referenced it a moment ago, and I want to just come back to it right quick here, because as you heard me say a moment ago, my view is that we ain't seen nothing yet when it comes to these culture wars. Your thoughts?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the Republicans have painted themselves into a corner where all they seem to be able to do is create new culture war issues to try and basically out-Trump Trump. But you really can't do that. So you end up looking sort of like, his main competitor is Ron DeSantis. And he looks a little pathetic almost compared to Donald Trump, who is so good at embodying these culture war issues. That they're just going to keep ratcheting up because they don't seem, at least at the moment, to have any other strategy than to just keep hammering on these same very divisive issues.
Yeah, he may be a mini-me standing next to Donald Trump, but he's trying his best on these culture wars, Ron DeSantis, that is, with his fight against Disney and a few other things I can mention. So he's trying at least to be a cultural warrior, even if he doesn't measure up to one Donald Trump. The other question I want to get to finally here is, it really takes us back, to the beginning where this conversation now come full circle. When you made the point that Donald Trump does not possess the moral values that many of his followers possess in their own belief system, and yet that does not stop them from supporting him. My point is, it's one thing for you and Donald Trump to be out of alignment on one or two issues, but with every single day, with every new indictment, we learn more and more about the fact that he has absolutely no moral compass whatsoever. And that still seems not to deter these persons from supporting him to the hilt. How do I read that?
So I think what you have to take into account is that they just don't believe a lot of the things that are being said about Donald Trump. This is where the conspiracy theories come in. And the thing that's said even by the Department of Justice, especially by the Democratic Party, but any of their perceived enemies against Donald Trump is just not believed. They see it as lies. And because they've already decided a priori to not believe these sources of information, then none of these new revelations have any effect because they just don't trust them. But the other assumption that you can kind of make is that, their moral values clearly weren't what they were stating them to be. So while they were stating that it was very important for them to, have family values, to uphold the sanctity of, the family and to support the nation, obviously those values weren't as important as they claimed. That there was a difference between their ideology and, in reality, what they support, which is Donald Trump.
So that sounds to me like a willful blindness.
Yes. We all have our blind spots.
Yeah,
some of them are more consequential than others.
No doubt about it. I take that. I agree with it, and I'll leave it there. Dr. Susannah Crockford has been our guest in this hour. She's an anthropologist, and we've been discussing in this hour, in case you tuned in late, her new study, which reveals that Donald Trump's rise in power resulted the first time around, and if it happens again, the second time around, from America's racial divide, not from this notion of some sort of cult of which he is the leader. Dr. Crockford, thanks for your research. Thanks for the conversation. Good to have you on this program.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
Thank you for joining us here on the Black Information Network. I'm Mike Moore. Now here's the latest. Lawyers for President Trump who held back a crowd during African-American George Floyd's arrest